Hello gang, ChefShot21 here. We are back at it with the Mini Mania series. This time we are redoing the turbo. As you just saw, taking apart the cold side is easy. It's 4 bolts that hold the cassette onto the cold side. The hot side is even easier. It's a V-band clamp with 1 bolt. You couldn't make it simpler. Just taking a look and make sure everything seems to be in order. There's the wastegate, pressure sensor. Wastegate is a vacuum actuator wastegate. These are pretty dead simple. The turbo cassette on that one was pretty well hammered, but you can buy new cassettes off of eBay, balanced and ready to go. And that's what's in this white box here. I don't remember how much I paid for it, and it was also 4 years ago now, or 3 years ago now, so prices will have changed. But if you go on to eBay and type in your engine and turbo cassette, they will show up. And they're usually pretty decently priced. I think this one came out of England, maybe. I think at the time it was like 120 or 150 bucks for the cassette, fully balanced, ready to go, same as factory. Whereas a new turbo assembly from the factory is, I think it was $600 at the time. Just giving everything a little bit of cleanup with some brake clean. You want these mating surfaces to be clean and tight when you put everything back together, just because you are building pressure. This is a boost system, so you want to make sure that everything is clean. I also tend to want just the stuff I'm putting back in a car fairly clean. Also try not to drop it. Especially try not to drop the cassette. Those are finely balanced because those things spin at several 100,000 RPM, and if you knock the balance out of them, it is going to be a bad day for you and for your turbo. So at this point, once you got it apart, spend the time and clean it. Brake clean is your friend, carb clean is your friend. I didn't have any brake or carb clean, so I'm just using brake clean. And it does make everything nicer when you're trying to reassemble, and makes it nice so you can see if there's any leaks or anything, oil leaks, once you put it together. Because these turbos are both oil and water cooled, so you want to make sure that if it's leaking, you can find out where and which fluid. That is rather important. So we'll get through the cleaning here in a couple minutes. I'll show you what the new cassette looks like, and then we shall get it all back together. I didn't show you splitting the hot side from the cassette, just because I did that way back at the beginning, and I didn't have the camera prepped for that one. I think I might have even done it before the engine came out of the car, because we took the downpipe off. So I think I took the downpipe off and then split the cassette. Split the turbo just so that it was not in the way, and then pulled the header off even. Or I did it right after it came down. I don't remember. It was almost 4 years ago when this engine came apart, and 3 years ago when it went back together, so my memory is a little rusted. I want to make sure the threads and the fasteners are clean too. This might just be my OCD kicking in, but if the threads are clean, you're not going to gall anything. If you do end up galling something, it wasn't that, it was cross-threading or something else. So clean everything up before you put it back together when you got it apart. That's really all I'm saying. Not sure where I just veered off to. We'll find out in a minute. Might be just hitting them on the wire wheel real quick, removing some of the big surface rest from it. But I think those fasteners were pretty good. This is the cold side. Again. Okay. There is the fresh cassette. And gently set it down, don't drop it again. Those fins are right where they're supposed to be, and they're very sensitive. You do not want to drop the fins. So everything's got tape and plugs where it's supposed to. I'm going to line this up as nicely as you can. And I do check it against the manifold just to make sure that I'm getting oil drain where it's supposed to be, the oil feed where it's supposed to be, the two water lines where they're supposed to be. Just because if they're not where they're supposed to be, it makes life much more difficult later down the line. That's not to say that you can't spin the whole cassette or either impeller housing to get the alignment correct once you get everything back together. You certainly can, and we do, but getting it close now is preferred. It makes life a whole lot easier when you're doing it. I'm going to go grab the manifold now with the hot side, I believe. And we got a little bit of cleaning to do on that. Or maybe I'm checking what the torque specs are for the cassette to cold side housing. I don't remember what they are. It's not very strong. It's like maybe 30 inch-pounds, I think. We'll see what torque wrench I get. But again, get the Bentley manual for this car. If you're going to do any of this work, it has all of the torque specs for everything. And it makes life so much easier when trying to rebuild this motor. Or do any work on the car. If you don't have the Bentley manual, trying to do the work is difficult and tedious because there's so much conflicting information online as to what is what. Okay, here is the hot side. So this is the exhaust volute that goes into the exhaust impeller. It was very crusty, carbon buildup, rust buildup. It's not going to seal nice. You need to have a decent mating flange between the turbo volute and the impeller, or the V-band clamp flange on the impeller or the cassette. So that is what we're doing here. I think I also do a little bit of cleanup on the exhaust ports. If you do something like this, you want to make sure that you then get any and all debris out of the volute and out of the manifold before it goes on the new turbo. That way you're not sending chunks of debris through the new turbo impeller, damaging that. Just a stainless steel wire brush and some more brake clean to start breaking up the carbon is all that is required for here, and a little time. Yeah, it's a little tedious work, but again, best to do it now than wait till later and have something happen and not be able to do it. Okay, I'm just checking the insides of the runners, seeing how they feel, making decisions on whether I need to clean them or not. I think I'm snapping off some pieces of hard carbon, and then I'm just going to scrub down the mating flange. Once the mating flange is clean, then I think we can get this back together and to start putting this back on the car, or back on the engine. You'll notice the manifold support bracket. We took it off the engine, we didn't take it off the manifold. This is for a couple of reasons, but the biggest one is bolts that go into an exhaust manifold, especially bolts that go right next to a turbo, get heat cycled a lot, which makes them get very tight. The last thing you want to do is snap that bolt off. So if you're taking it apart, leave that bolt in. Take the bolt off the block. Makes your life so much easier. And when you're pulling the manifold bolts, be very, very careful with pulling them off for the same reason. They get hot, they get heat cycled, they want to seize, they want to stick. If you're too aggressive with it and you're not careful, you will pull threads out, you will snap studs. Do not do that. It is a pain in the butt to fix, and you will regret it, especially because the studs are steel, and I believe the head on this is aluminum. So you got a difference in materials that causes galvanic reactions in addition to disparate thermal expansion factors, which is a whole nother ball of wax. Just be careful when you pull studs on the intake. And when you do go back together, put everything back together with never seize. Aluminum stuff is okay. Copper stuff is better if you can find it. It's expensive, but the nickel never seize is actually rated for exhaust work. It is very expensive for a very small tube, but you use very little of it. So it's nothing to worry about. Spend the $7 for the travel toothpaste size tube of it, or the $10 or whatever it is up to now. Put a little bit on every fastener on the exhaust, and then never have to worry about if those fasteners are going to come back out, if you should need to take them back out, because they will. I put everything on the hot side back together with that stuff, and I've had to take the hot side apart a few times since this engine went back together for various exhaust work. I've had to do new O2s, new cats, had an oopsie with the alternator when this car went back together. Had to take the exhaust out for that. Everything's come apart and gone back together as smoothly as it possibly could have. do yourself a favor, put on the Never Seas. It will make your life 10 times easier. Yeah, got the hard scraper out, and we're just doing a little bit of hard carbon buildup, removal, and then I think I'm changing songs or something. So a little bit of hard carbon buildup removal right around the edges of the manifolds, or of the ports on the manifold. You want this to be as close to a uniform surface as possible, especially if you're putting on a fresh gasket. It's supposed to be a reusable gasket. I don't trust it. It's a multi-layered steel gasket, an integrated heat shield, or mounting for the heat shield. Do yourself a favor, buy a fresh one. They're not hugely expensive. You probably got a fresh one if you got a gasket set for your engine. Use it. Put a fresh one on there. Don't take the chance at a leaky exhaust, because you really don't want to have to pull this piece off. If you got to pull the downpipe and the cat off, that's one thing. That's 4 bolts. This is those 4 bolts plus another 12 or 16. Just replace it while you're in there. You'll thank yourself later. The other thing while you're in there, and we're going to do this, I think next week's video, is to not 2 weeks. Will be to do the oil lines for the turbo. I think I've mentioned this once already. I'm going to mention it again. If you're in there, replace the oil lines. Take a look at the water lines. If those are in need of replacement, replace those. They get worn, they get damaged, they don't like it being in that hot an environment. The mini factory oil lines, the return line's okay. The feed line I don't necessarily trust, just because of how it was designed. So when I took it off, there was some looseness that I was pretty sure needed addressing. Okay, so in the foreground here you see the V-band clamp. I believe mine broke, or I pulled the threads out of the bolt, and so I needed to just go down to the hardware store, get a bolt and nut, and it's working out just fine. If you're going to do that, or if you have that happen, make sure you get stainless steel hardware. Not sure what I'm getting. Ah, yes. There is a alignment key, I believe, on one of these. So I pulled out our key stock. I think it's an alignment key. And that makes it oh so very helpful for getting things where you want them to be. But it is a little bit difficult for, yes, there's an alignment pin. So I got out some roll pins, and we're finding out how that goes and making sure that there's a respective pinhole on the cassette, to which there is. That gets your cassette alignment relative to the exhaust volute in the correct orientation. Now on the wastegate, you pull off the back nut, and then you gently slide everything into place. Line up the turbo cassette dowel pin with the hole. Push everything together. Make sure your wastegate is where it's supposed to be. And then pop that nut back on. If you only undo the rear nut, then you don't have to worry about re-spacing your wastegate, because there is a set amount of throw on those. And then the next piece is going to be getting that V-band clamp on there. So V-band clamp goes on. I try to get the bolt head in an alignment where it's not going to interfere with anything, along with the tail of the bolt. It is a little tricky, but once you've got it, it's fairly easy. I do think I'm torquing down the... No, I'm loosening the manifold, the intake volute, just so I can get the wastegate alignment correct. And it appears like I've got it. Yep. So just snug them down by hand for the moment. There's a torque spec for those. I don't remember what it is. And then it is time to maybe think about finishing this thing up. So alright, those are all snugged up by hand. We're looking good. Wastegate moves back and forth. It's very free. It is kind of a spring-loaded thing. Take it as such. And this is getting the V-band clamp locked in place. And you want that snug. I mean, go fairly tight. Don't go Hulk on it. But tight is good. Again, because that surface needs to seal correctly in order for your turbo to function correctly. If you don't have a good seal right there, you're going to lose exhaust to blow by. That's going to cause your turbo to spin slower, cause your intake to get less pressure, throw a code, and just make you less efficient, and probably screw up your engine bay too. So don't do that. Don't let that happen. I'm not sure what I disappeared off to. I think this is torque spec time. Yeah, probably is torque spec time, because finding where it is in the manual is kind of a pain. It is in there. Yep, torque spec. And it is an inch-pound torque spec. I'm going to go with it's not a very big one, just based on how big that torque wrench is. Yeah, so I have to take this thing apart to get all 4 of the bolts torqued. So you got to get it set up, got to get your alignment right, take it back apart, then finish torquing it. It can be fairly substantial torque amount, actually. Do it a couple times if you can. I like to work up to torque. First time is just get it snug. Second time is one step closer. Third time is final torque. And second and third time can be the same number, but do go around twice, same as you would if you were torquing lug nuts on a car. You always torque it once, and then go back a second time and torque it again. And then on those, you actually go drive it for a while and torque it again a third time. This one, that's not necessary, or as necessary. And it appears that now is when we get the V-band set for the last time. And after that is set, then we are basically done with this whole endeavor here. Not sure what I'm checking there for. Torque on the V-band clamp maybe isn't really critical. Just go with tight, but not stripping threads out. You'll get a feel for that. If you get it really tight and then it starts to give again, stop. You've gone too far. Go get a new fastener. It is past time for that one to be retired. Because if it's starting to give again, it's starting to yield. When the fastener is yielding, it is losing strength. Just let it go. And buy the, I don't know, extra $1.50 in hardware. Is not worth running a broken piece of hardware on something like this, because when it comes apart, it will come apart catastrophically. And you don't want that. You do not want it coming apart catastrophically. So we'll just see what's going on. Okay, I think I might have these out of sequence here slightly. More torquey. Yeah, I think this clip got out of sequence, but I'm not redoing this whole audio recording, so this is going to stay as it is. Yeah, I'm getting the hand torquing this thing down to final torque. So GoPro does weird things with video numbering for some reason. Like sometimes it'll be GoPro and then a set. Other times it will be GP01 and then the number. And I think I had that happen here. Didn't realize it when I did my quick scroll through. So, yeah. It's a two-person job to torque this, or put it in a vise, but be very careful when you put it in a vise. Put it in there with soft jaws, or use a couple pieces of 2x4, or something to hold it so you don't crush it, and so you don't mar it. Because that is a big concern as to whatever, to the life of your turbo. This is everything back together. I think there's one last little bit of bolting back together. But this is what you should have for a final product. It's going to be your full exhaust header and turbo with the V-band holding the section, the cold side and cassette onto the hot side. Make sure you get your vacuum actuator for the wastegate hooked up. And then, yeah, see, big torque wrench for the V-band clamp. This clamp had been compromised, so when I went to torque it, it either snapped or stripped the heads off, the threads off of the bolt. So I had to get a fresh one. I'll give you guys that just as a, oh yeah, that happens. Again, no big deal. Ran down to the hardware store, got a nut, got a bolt, and put it back on. Little hand holding this down because it was wanting to twist on me, and you do not want to push on the vacuum actuator for the wastegate. Yeah, this is where I'm like, something's not right here, but I'm gonna keep this going. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to flipping one of those around. No big deal. Easy enough to do. We'll hope to see you next time. Sharps out.